And they're learning fundamentally who they are as citizens of that community and who they will be in the future. School is best when it allows kids to be kids, teachers to teach, and humans to be humans. We learn all of these things nearly automatically if you just put a small group of young people in a room together with a caring, passionate professional, free of distractions, like cell phones. Attention is fractured more and more as the years go on. And as someone with ADHD myself, I not only can see, but I feel these distractions maybe a little bit more than most. Also because I'm trying to captivate a room and call attention to what I'm trying to teach. I don't need to explain this. We all can kind of feel it ourselves. Standing in line, literally anywhere, with any moment to spare, thoughtlessly, subconsciously reaching into your pocket, checking your phone, winding up spending 10 to 100 minutes on it, and then coming out of the days. It separates us from the real world, from the social connections we need to feel safe and happy. Apps intentionally are designed to be addicting. Apps like social media hijack the core of our brains and stimulate the dopamine system in a runaway positive feedback cycle. I taught this to my students to help them understand how to rewire their brains for positive change, and I'd like to say it worked. And while I love that, it's not exactly part of the biology curriculum, and it's certainly not in the purview of the math teacher trying to teach trigonometry or the English teacher making Shakespeare come to life. And although effective and rewarding for me, it was exhausting. Every single day to fight the good fight to help these kids learn about their world, their brains, how they pay attention, and dream about their futures, and make friends. So let me tell you my story. In September of last year, I started having anxiety attacks interspersed with depression that did get into the suicidal ideation realm. I came home most days and would collapse on the floor. My wife was my rock. Honestly, saved my life. By December, with the help of a lot of good conversations with my principal, we discovered that the landscape of cell phones had changed so drastically, almost suddenly. In January, I vowed to wage war against cell phone addiction. I decided at that point that I could not continue as a teacher for my mental health and the benefit of my family, but I was going to finish out my contract and finish out the year and help my students in the best way that I knew how. In May, my students and I did the famous phone detox challenge, and that is the fight, I promise you, we won. When smartphones started making their way into schools years ago, we were all trying to find the balance between using them as tools and managing them as distractions. Every teacher had a different policy and that they were all comfortable with. And it honestly wasn't that big of a deal, but it very slowly has become more and more of a deal. With the pandemic, which I'm sure you remember, it changed our world drastically and suddenly. School became isolated and purely academic. And when we came back from a year of teaching online, kids were feral. It was quite interesting. We had to re-socialize as a society, and with the pubescent teenagers, it was a riot in all senses of the word. Kind of fun, definitely crazy all the time. But at that time, everyone was so starved and so hungry for human connection, phones didn't really stand in the way that much. That's why I say in 2023, things took a really sharp turn for me. I know every school and every child has like a different timeline as to when we realize that phones are a problem as a distraction or social media is a problem emotionally for the development of students. But the US Surgeon General came out in the middle of 2023 to talk about the loneliness epidemic and the dangers of cell phones on the developing minds of our youth. Suicide, mental health, therapy, depression, anxiety, loneliness. This is every single day with almost all of my students. And these are things we all see, we all experience at all ages. But I saw it increase so sharply in the last 2 years, especially in the last year. What didn't become clear to various is how much of this is caused or exacerbated directly from cell phones. But now we have the research. There are fantastic studies, a book from Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation that I actually showed to my students. And I'll tell you, they sit there and they watch someone talk about the dangers of cell phones, and they're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's right. I feel that. I feel disconnected from people. I know it's hard to make friends. I am lonely, and I spend sometimes 16 hours a day on my phone. 4 of those hours maybe on TikTok. Part of that phone detox challenge, the students would show me their screen time. We would look at their top apps. Anywhere from 1 to 4 hours on TikTok every single day. Anywhere from 1 to 4 hours on Instagram. Sometimes talking to people, direct messaging, sometimes just scrolling. But if you're talking to someone on your phone, you're not talking to them face to face. There is something so crucial to the development, to the basic human needs of all of us, but especially kids, that you get face to face that you just don't get on a phone. And they started to realize that. That's what we did in the Phone Detox Challenge. And I had kids dropping their screen times over 50%. That's hard. You try and do that for the next week. It's very, very hard. But they can do it with help. They have to understand it's not their fault. And that's what I would say to them over and over and over. It's not your fault. I'm here to help. These are some things that we can do. But again, I was supposed to be teaching biology. And I like to sneak that stuff in because I care so much. But if we can help them with some legislation, some top-down rule that tells all of our, that gives some muscle to all of our teachers and all of our administrators and support staff so that they can say, listen, this is just a policy. You're not allowed to have your phone here. I'm telling you, so many things will flow from that. Over half of my students have headphones in at all times. You want me to finish up? Yeah, I'll wrap it up. Sorry. That's me. I'm a teacher. You know, I have to explain myself fully and fully. But change is not easy. But the emotional academic toll of cell phones are taking on our kids warrants a drastic and sudden response. This is one of the simplest ways that we can help our schools, students, teachers, and the Arizona economy to flourish. So let's do it. Let's help them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next is Senator Shauna Bolick, who is a supporter of this type of legislation. Shauna?
Well, good morning to
Because
everybody
that's your
who's
notes,
showed
right?
up and everybody online. My name is Shauna Bolick. I'm a state senator in District 2.
Just as mine.
And I can attest that cell phones are very damaging to our youth. I might not look it, but I have a 19, almost 20-year-old and a 22-year-old son, and we lived cell phone use in the schools. So my kids went to both district and charter schools over the years. Sometimes the one school would have a policy and others wouldn't. And sometimes you would notice that the kids had their phones out during the day. And in my opinion, as a parent, there's a good tool of a cell phone, but it's not during class time. I am going to be working with some schools in my district and some parents in my district during the interim to see what kind of solutions we can come up with. I did support Pingarelli's bill this past session that Superintendent Tom Horn had suggested that we start looking at. If you want to reach out to my office, if you want to have some ideas, feel free to email me at sbolick, B-O-L-I-C-K, @azleg.gov. I always read through my emails and typically respond. If I don't respond immediately, you can always call my office. I don't have that number on top of my head. But I think we should pull together a task force, representatives of teachers, administrators, students, as well as parents to make sure that we're all on the same page. I do like the put away method. My daughter's school, all through high school, they were allowed to have their cell phones out all the time. That did not distract her learning, but she's different from other students. My son's school, they had to put their cell phones from grades 5 through 12 in their locker for the day, and there were some fewer issues at that school. So obviously I'm a parent. My kids are grown now, but I would like to actually make sure that we're watching out for students who are in the classroom, and also reducing cyberbullying. So those are some of the things that I'm going to be looking at to make sure that Wire will be a sponsor of legislation. As the teacher who unfortunately had to resign, Mitchell had to resign because he couldn't handle cell phones in the classroom. It was making his students anxious. I think it's super important to have input from the teachers who are in the classrooms every single day, who are dealing with this, and to the administrators who are having to deal with attention problems, student discipline, and so forth. So I look forward to working with them creating a task force. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Listening to Mitchell reminded me that in May of 2023, the Surgeon General came out with a report that said that social media was causing a loneliness epidemic, which was affecting students' mental health. And when it affects their mental health, it affects their ability to learn. And then in June of 24, this year, the Surgeon General suggested that parents put a limit on cell phone use and that social media contain a warning, just as cigarettes do. Also, I want to thank Representative Pingarelli, who was unable to be here today, but she was the sponsor of the bill last year, and Senators Shope and Representative Gress, who couldn't be here today, but who also support this bill. So next we'll hear from Payson Governing Board Member Susan Ward, who drove a long way to be here. Susan?
Academic achievement, of course, is a top priority as a governing board member. There's mounting evidence that cell phones in the classroom are a great distraction and affecting student achievement. I'm in support of developing policies that best support our students' academics as well as mental health. Cell phones in classrooms are also a tremendous distraction. We hear reports from teachers all the time of students being distracted and not paying attention. We had a teacher up at Payson who decided to do a little experiment of her own. When she came to class, she cleared her whiteboard. She asked the students at the beginning of class, each time that you are distracted or are thinking about your cell phone or getting back on your cell phone, I'd like to come up to the front of the classroom, make a tally on the board. Amazingly, by the end of class, the entire board was covered with tallies. So this is a problem that the students and the teachers are facing, and I think that with education, working together, a task force, we can come up with sensible policies that will best benefit our students. Thank you.
I think that illustrates why the cell phone needs to be away for the day, not just put away during the class break, because they're thinking about how many minutes to go before they can look at their cell phone. So the cell phone seems to be away for the day. Finally, before we take questions, Apache Junction District Superintendent Dr. Bob Papalardo, who came here along, and we're grateful for that.
Good morning. I'm the proud superintendent of Apache Junction Light School District. I've talked to many of you over the last few months since our governing board decided to restrict cell phone usage in classrooms. The first question I get is, why did you do it? Well, I'm a superintendent that visits classrooms regularly with my principals. We walk the halls, we walk the classrooms, we walk the cafeteria. So during learning time, we expect that kids, like Mitchell said, are interacting either with other students or their teacher. Instead, they're watching Netflix, Prime, or TikTok. Okay, there's no way that learning is happening. If we're serious about student achievement, it's our job to help them limit that distraction. Okay, so that's why we do it. Okay, so the second part of this is, so as I'm thinking about that with my principals and my administrative team, we looked at the research. So once a kid is in the classroom, and as the governing board member from Payson says, they're on their phone to look at TikTok or some other social media thing, it's now 23 minutes before their brain is re-engaged with the curriculum. And that study is from New Zealand. You guys can look it up. Okay, because over the pond, on the other side of the world, they've already found what the problem is and are looking for ways to solve it. So my solve was, okay, governing board, we need to help our teachers be able to enforce something, okay? And we know that teachers will, if they have the teeth behind them to say, it's not my fault, like Mitchell said, this is policy. And so I have a student advisory council for the superintendent. I met with them less than 24 hours ago. And my first question to them was, how's school going this year? They said, it's amazing. There's a lot more respect in the classroom for our teachers. We are now connecting with our teachers. And I said, what do you attribute that to that? Says, well, we're not fighting about cell phones or other devices in class. Kids know it's going to be taken, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. When we give people the tools to be successful, they can. When we build connections with kids, they then have respect for their teachers, and they don't fight about it anymore. We're not in that battle right now. We're 5 weeks of school. We've had one parent complain at the junior high, 0 at the high school, and 0 at the district office. And that's an attribute to our community and our staff and our students. So, as the senator said, a task force would be wonderful to get everybody's input on what works for their community and how to do what's right for their kids. So thank you very much.
I want to mention just one other thing, and then we'll take the questions. Sometimes we get parents saying they think for safety's sake, they want their kids to have the cell phones. And actually, it's the opposite is the case. If there's a emergency at school, you don't want students on their cell phones. You want them listening to instructions. And if they're all on their cell phones, it could interfere with the broadband that are needed for emergency communications. If it's a problem at home, the schools need to have a line where the parents can call in. They can go get the student out of class, and the student can talk to their parents. Then that's the way we always used to do it, and it works just fine. We're delighted to take your questions.
Okay, Superintendent?
Yes.
Hi, Brenda with 12 News here.
Yes.
Of course. Obviously, we were just talking about the addictive behavior of cell phone usage, and then you talked about, parents' concerns for safety. The reason these kids have cell phones is because the parents are buying the cell phones for their kids. And touching on that again, what you just mentioned, people are concerned about their child's safety with things happening like what happened in Uvalde, right? Like, some parents are really not going to understand, and the reason that they get cell phones for their children is so they can stay in contact with them in the event that something like that happens, which you kind of somewhat addressed, but I still think that parents are still going to have questions regarding that.
Well, that's why we're doing this. We need to convey to parents that from a state safety standpoint, students should not have their cell phones. And in fact, the protocol is if there's a lockdown at school, collect all the cell phones. First thing you do. If there's a lockdown at school. You mentioned that students have cell phones because their parents bought it for them. Parents don't have the kind of power we think, and I know this from having raised 4 kids who went to our public school system and now are very successful adults. And they were in school in elementary school, I think, when the video games first started. I thought this is not a good thing, and I didn't want to have video games at home. But then my son comes and complains that at his friend's house, they have the video games and he doesn't get a fair share. So if other parents are doing it, there's tremendous pressure on you to do it. And so there are times where I think the legislature and the governor have to take responsibility and put an end to this terrible problem.
But what about the individual schools or the individual classrooms? Why does it have to be kind of like a statewide thing? Don't schools already kind of look into those types of issues and situations they're having at their schools?
No teacher should be expected to have to teach a class where the students are scrolling on their cell phones. If you leave it up to the district, a lot of teachers are going to have to do that. Their burdens are great enough. Their students need to learn and not be on their social media. And this has to be a statewide rule because we should not expect this of any single teacher, to have to teach a class when the kids are scrolling on their cell phones. Yes.
Here's for choose one here. Like you mentioned, some of you endorsed a bill similar to this one last legislative session, but it got vetoed by Governor Hobbs. What outcome do you think this is gonna be this second time around? Because you could easily just veto it again. I know you're pushing for people to call your office, but will that make a difference?
Of course it will. Politicians respond to the public. And that's one reason I'm grateful for all of you to be here. Because word gets out, people know they need to call the governor's office and tell her, don't veto it next time.
Another question. I also spoke with teachers in the Tucson area. Although some might not agree with some of your policies, a lot of them tell me that they do agree somewhat with the banning cell phones during class or throughout the entire day, because they say students can just go to the office and call their parents during an emergency situation. Do you think this is a non-political thing that everybody should agree on?
Absolutely. And, I'm a bipartisan kind of guy, and I'm really glad we have this as a bipartisan issue. Because it's not a party issue at all. No person, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or any other party, should think that a teacher should have to teach a class while the students are able to scroll on their cell phones. Yes.
I'm actually jumping again here, but because it is another legislative session and it was let's read that last time, kind of following up to that. Do you know if any changes or certain tweaks that could be expected to the bill or legislation?
Well, assuming Representative Pingarelli is the sponsor again, that'll be up to her. But my view is that because of what Susan Ward told us, that even if the students have to put the cell phone away during the class period, if they have it on their bodies, they're constantly thinking about it, and they're thinking, oh, how many minutes to go? 3 minutes to go before I can check my cell phone. It needs to be away for the school day, and so I will urge that it be changed in that respect, that it require that it be away for the school day.
We made a mention of a task force, so are you in the process of creating a task force now, or?
We have not done that. I'll have to check with Representative Pingarelli, who was a sponsor of the bill last year. If she wants to do that, I will certainly participate.
I have a question kind of facing off of what 12 asked, reframing this. Local school districts or local school boards make their own policies. Why make this a blanket statewide ban instead of encouraging school boards to do this instead?
Well, obviously, we do encourage school boards to do it, but if it's not a statewide away for the school day policy, then some teachers will be required to teach classes while the kids are scrolling on their cell phones, and no teacher should be required to do that. Their burdens are already big enough. Yes.
What's your vision for how this could be enforced at the school level, especially when legislation directs schools to prohibit cell phone use throughout the entire day, including lunch?
Yeah, if you take the cell phone away, if they break the rule, that has a wonderful effect. Anybody else?
I have a question related to education, but not the cell phone usage. Can you describe your department's latest efforts to ensure vendors and parents are not committing fraud through the ESA program? And have you sent recommendations for new investigations of alleged fraud to the Attorney General's office in recent months?
We have, and when I took office, we started off, I hired an auditor, which had never been true before, to oversee this to prevent fraud. And I'm a former Attorney General. We're determined to eliminate fraud from ESAs, and we have sent a number of cases to the Attorney General's office.
And one more question,
Yeah.
also on the issue of ESAs. We're beginning the third year of universal ESAs, and the legislature has yet to pass any law that's meant to determine how well ESA recipients are learning. How will you be able to determine if universal ESAs are leading to better academic outcomes for students?
Well, with ESAs, the parent can choose a private school if they want, and we've never required that of private schools. Most private schools do test the kids, but the state has never gotten involved in private schools. That's probably a constitutional issue. But I do want to say one thing that we've learned, because we're constantly accused that ESAs are causing the deficit in the budget. And I've said for a long time that those calculations are incorrect because they're not accounting for the fact that we may give $7,400 to a family for an ESA, but if they were in the public school, they'd cost the state $13,000. And now we have proof of it in that the budget year is over, and all education, public and ESA, are $5 million below what the budget was set at. So education, no part of education can be contributing to the deficit. The main cause of the deficit was that they overestimated what the revenues would be.
Legislation that was being put by House also included a requirement for schools to prohibit access to social media on district data. Is that something that we plan to be pushing for as well?
I wasn't familiar with that part. My thing was get the cell phones out. Yes.
Any potential difference in need for a cell phone for a student versus like a high school student, maybe versus an elementary school student?
Absolutely not. No teacher at any level should have to teach a class where the kids are scrolling on their cell phones. Now, I wonder if any of my colleagues would like to comment on any of the questions? Yes.
Are there any other states that have this type
I believe that's true, yes. Yeah, New York and California have bans.
So it would be a ban, not necessarily a recommendation, like in order to receive some type of funding, right? It would just be like straight up, no cell phones whatsoever, not like giving the option to where if you don't do it, you don't receive the certificate.
No, absolute ban. Or what do we call it? Away for the day. Away for the school day. No cell phones when you're supposed to be in class learning. Yes.
Some school districts that I've spoken to will purchase in certain classrooms. Can you imagine any sort of funding approach to this legislation you feel like that would be required for this to be effective?
A little louder.
Sure. Some school districts purchase cell phone models for students to put their phones away. Do you envision any sort of funding approach to this legislation? Do you think that would be necessary for it to affect that?
That's the sort of thing the districts handle.
Are there any further questions?
I have a question for Mitchell. What are you doing now?
What am I doing now? We just welcomed my daughter into the world at the beginning of June. And I've been a father this summer, trying to figure out a way to help students and still contribute to the community, using my compassion for students and teaching in a way that is sustainable for me in maintaining my mental health. So I'm looking for positions that would kind of be like adjacent to teaching or like supporting students, still working within schools, because I still very much believe in public schools and the mission of schools and teachers.
Last question for you. Did you leave the profession solely based on the cell phone issue or were there other factors involved as well?
I can't say it was 100% cell phones, but when I first started struggling and realizing that like I had to leave, like something had to change, I then through many conversations with all the people in my life that I love, and especially my wonderful principal and my colleagues there, it dawned on me. I remember exactly where I was in the conversation I was having with him, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's cell phones. Like that's what's making my kids seem so apathetic, so disengaged, so lonely, and have so many mental health issues themselves. It's like, that's it. And then it was very nice because then it's like, I could just blame this thing. It's not the kid's fault. It's like, I understand what the problem is. And although it's a monumental task to manage, it's like, that's the thing.
And did you see a correlation between, their usage and their grades or anything like that? Did you have something to kind of like, show that, yeah, this was an issue? Has this been an issue for a number of years, or was it after like COVID, or like,
Yeah, changed really fast, is from what I saw. Like, there definitely was a correlation that, it's not to say that some of my students who were crushing it academically were had their screen time up to 8, 9, 10 hours a day. But in general, I didn't actually plot the points, but we were looking at screen time and trying to see it. And yeah, if a kid doesn't want to be successful, or I shouldn't say they don't want to be successful. If a student is struggling to be successful in class, it's so easy to just look at your phone. If you struggle with a subject, if you are having a hard time making friends, any of that, it's so easy to just have this quick opt out. And so they would spend so much time. And I'll tell you, it's not just me. Every single student would tell me, they were like, wow, I spend way too much time on my phone. Oh my gosh, I don't really like this. I want to make friends. I want to figure out how to make friends. I'm struggling in school. I'm struggling with my mental health. All you got to do is like spend a little bit of time to tell them, like, listen, it's your cell phone. It's not you. And then all of a sudden, like, they get it, and they want to work towards towards managing it. But the problem is then it's just like, okay, we're dealing with the most addictive device in the history of human civilization. So like, we need to help them all we can.
Okay, and one more question. What would you say to parents out there as an educator? Like I mentioned, these kids, they get cell phones from their parents. Is there any message out there that any of you or you have for parents out there? Because parents are an integral part of this.
Yeah, I'd agree with Tom here, that when all the kids have it, and then your kid comes home and says, I want to download this app. All my kids are on TikTok. All my kids are communicating on Instagram. All my kids have a smartphone. All my kids have this phone. That's in the same way that it's not right to ask a teacher to be cell phone police. It's so hard to ask a parent to be the person that says, no, you can't have a cell phone. And tomorrow you can't have a cell phone. And the day after that, you can't have a cell phone. And they're going to, feel like they're disconnected from their friends, or feel like they just like don't have the thing. I mean, that's got to be so hard as a parent. And so that's where I feel like we could just have a simple thing, right? It's like, there's so many things that we don't allow kids to do in school because it impacts their learning and their social development. And this is just the most recent one and the biggest one.
Right, can you ask a question to the teacher? Do you have any concerns about students' ability to communicate with parents in the event of an emergency?
That's such a sensitive issue, and it's so difficult. That is, honestly, that's just not my department.
Yeah, let me help.
It's tough.
If the emergency's at home, parents call a school, somebody goes and get the student out of the classroom. That's the way we would have always done it. The emergencies at school, having them on their cell phones is the worst thing that can happen. They need to be listening to the instructions and not tying up the broadband. And that's why the protocol is, if there's a school lockdown, the cell phones are taken away. So from a safety standpoint, from an emergency standpoint, the cell phones are a big barrier. And we need to understand that, because too many people have a misconception that it increases safety to be able to communicate on the cell phone and the kid should be learning. It doesn't, it causes problems. If there's a family emergency at home, they call the school gets the student out of class, and they can talk to them that way.
We're gonna wrap up. I suspect that everybody else wants one-on-one with you to make that happen, but whatever that is. So thanks for being here. Appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much for covering this vital issue. This is a real emergency for our country.